Good morning, everyone. I'm frequently asked what being the majority leader of the Senate is like. The best answer I've been able to come up with is it's a little bit like being the groundskeeper at a cemetery. Everybody's under you, but nobody's listening. So what is it that I get to do that the other 99 don't? And that is the schedule. What are we going to do? And I expect most of you would share my view that the most consequential decision I've made since I've been in this particular role was a decision not to do something. And that was a decision not to fill the Supreme Court vacancy when Justice Scalia died in the middle of the presidential election in 2016. Farthest reaching ramification of anything we do, obviously, is lifetime appointments to the courts. At the time I made that decision, I wasn't certain who was going to be nominating, but I felt the American people ought to weigh in on a decision of that consequence in the 11th hour of the previous administration. As it turned out, during this particular Congress, which is coming to a close, I think we can look back, at least I can, and I hope most of you can look back, on two new Supreme Court appointments as an extremely important step for the American people over the next generation. Nothing we do is as consequential as lifetime appointments. Also, for my party, the opportunity to control the entire government hadn't come along very often. For those of you who are not political junkies, and I assume that's most of you, you can go back 100 years. And my party's only controlled the White House, the House, and the Senate for 20 of the last 100 years. So when I woke up the day after the election in 2016, I said to myself, these opportunities don't come along very often. Let's do everything we can to maximize this opportunity the American people have given us to move the country right of center, and obviously in a very different direction from the previous 8 years. So now we're wrapping up this Congress, and I think we can look back and see what kind of scorecard we deserve. 2 Supreme Court justices, cementing what most experts believe a kind of right of center Supreme Court for a generation. 29 new U.S. Circuit Court judges, about 1/6 of the Circuit Court judges. That's one step below the Supreme Court. Remember, very few cases make it to the Supreme Court. Just a tiny percentage of the cases in America go all the way to the top. Most of them stop at the Circuit Court level. We've done 29. One of every 6 Circuit Court judges in America was appointed by Donald Trump and confirmed by this Congress. The fastest pace in American history. All of you are impacted by regulations. We use this law called the Congressional Review Act to take 16 onerous regulations off the books, 16 of them. It had been used once in history. Many of those regulations went right at the heart of difficulties for American agriculture. Comprehensive tax reform, first time in 30 years. 30 years. Those don't come along all that often. While I would love to have completely gotten rid of the death tax, we doubled the exemption so that most of you, in trying to pass your family farm down to the next generation, will not be impacted. I don't know how many of you ran into community banks who were having difficulty lending because of the so-called Dodd-Frank Act of the previous era. And we carved a big chunk out of that to provide relief for small banks, medium-sized banks, and credit unions. You've seen the results of all this activity because we have a robust economy in general. I know that's not true in agriculture, but it's a robust economy in general in our country. So here we wind down, come to the end. The American people restored divided government a couple of weeks ago. They must like divided government. Most of you probably think we all ought to get along, and then people go out and elect divided government. We've had divided government more often than not since World War II. So this unique opportunity we had this past 2 years will go away starting next year, and we'll be in a time of divided government again. It doesn't mean nothing will happen, but it will be very difficult from a legislative point of view to steer right of center with a Democratic House. But the Senate, as all of you know, is in the personnel business. There are 1,200 executive branch appointments that come to us for confirmation, the most important of which obviously are the courts, but there are a whole lot of other things. The SEC, the NLRB, who's going to be secretary of this or assistant secretary of that, we'll still be able to put all the people in place because of our majority in the Senate, which the American people have continued for 2 more years. And I think the president and his team have done an excellent job of picking personnel and sending them up to us. There's obviously one very, very significant item of business left in this Congress, and you know what it is. You know, for a guy who grew up in Louisville, went to a big public high school, had little or no experience or interaction with farming, it's really been an improbable journey for me to be involved with you for all these years. And if you don't mind a little bit of trip down memory lane, I remember in the 90s when I had for a few years one of my rare moments of disagreement with this organization, Mark, and we were discussing the future of the tobacco program. And the initial reaction, I think, of the Farm Bureau, like a lot of others, was skepticism about letting go of the program, even though we knew it was collapsing. So I found myself in an extremely awkward position of suggesting a buyout. My colleague Wendell Ford thought it was a terrible idea. He was leaving the Senate. Jim Bunning was running for his seat. And I said, Jim, don't adopt what I've suggested here because it's extremely unpopular and it'll help defeat you. So we had Bunning against the buyout, and so I was out there in a rather exposed place. Anyway, it didn't happen, and a couple of years later, I think we all concluded together after discussing it that if we could pull this off somehow, it was the best way to save the program. Now, I won't argue that I'm the best salesman in the world, but just imagine the argument you're making to about, 45 out of 50 states that we ought to use the federal government to compensate people and get for no longer being able to grow tobacco. Can you think of anything more unpopular if you're from a state where they don't grow tobacco? You can't. So the issue was, how in the world do you pull this off? First, it can't be taxpayer money. And second, just in terms of trying to find the right vehicle in a complicated legislative process with a whole lot of things swirling around, how do you pull it off? Well, I fortunately at that particular point was in the number 2 position in the leadership in my party. We were in the majority. I essentially put myself on a conference report on a completely unrelated bill that had nothing whatsoever to do with this. We airdropped into it the tobacco buyout. The money came from an assessment, basically, that the companies paid. And bam, it happened, and President Bush signed it. And over the next 10-year period, those of you who were growing tobacco, which is a lot of you, were compensated for the asset the government had created in the first place. And that was my other argument. The government created the asset. They came around and measured your historic production and assigned these quotas. And as all of us know, they would shrink and expand occasionally over the years, but basically the asset was created by government action, back when Alvin Barkley had the same job that I have now. So that was the argument. And over 10 years, the buyout occurred. The next big thing to come along, you were skeptical about, and so was I. Hemp? Hemp? Sounds like something else. And I have a lot of friends who were sheriffs, and to say that they had minimum enthusiasm is to put it mildly. But I started looking at it more carefully and concluded that it clearly was not its illicit cousin. Excuse me. It was all over the country anyway, imported from elsewhere, and might have some real potential. So in the Farm Bill in 14, I put in it the pilot projects that a number of Kentuckians have begun to use. Excuse me, I've been struggling with a little raspy voice here. And to give you an example of where I think this could conceivably take us, I visited a friend of mine in Harrison County, thinking I was just going to be looking at a farm, but it was also a processor. And the CEO of the processor was there, and he lives in Australia. And I'm thinking to myself, goodness, this could be something big, because you've got international interest in it. I'm on a plane coming home from Louisville. Young guy comes up with a UK hat on. He says, I'm growing hemp, and I'm thinking about becoming a processor, and I got a couple of investors. And he mentioned a couple of big name investors, both of whom I knew. So another light goes on. I'm thinking, oh, really? So I'm not going to oversell what this could become, but I think it could be really significant. I'm not predicting it's going to be the next tobacco in terms of the number of different people that benefited from the tobacco program, but there's a lot of excitement out there among young Kentucky farmers. And so let me give you the status of the Farm Bill. Excuse me, we're very close. We've reached an agreement in principle. Just to make sure it turned out right, I appointed myself to the conference. There's some advantages to being the majority leader. I generally have influence at the conferees. Those are the people appointed. The speaker appoints so many, I appoint so many, the two minority leaders appoint so many, and they get together and work out the differences. That's what a conference is. I get to appoint the conferences on all the bills. So I talked to all the conferees and put myself on it and been involved in these discussions. And there were two high priorities for us in the Farm Bill beyond the obvious, which is crop insurance is critical for everybody, particularly with the challenges in American agriculture lately. We also had an East Kentucky power issue, kind of a complicated RUS Eastern Kentucky power issue that needed to be worked out, and it did get worked out. But the most important thing, benefiting the largest number of people, was this. So I'm not here today to spike the ball in the end zone yet, but we're real close to getting there. I've talked to the president about it several times because there was an unrelated issue that he was pretty concerned about, and that was a work requirement for food stamps, which our Democratic friends are very resistant to. So we had to try to figure out how to synthesize that in such a way that we could still get Democratic votes, which we need, and get the president's signature, which we also need. So I think we're pretty close to getting there, and I'm hopeful that this will become a really big thing for us here in Kentucky and provide a great source of farm income looking into the future. As was indicated in the introduction, I've now been there a while, 34 years, but I want to thank you all for the relationships that we've developed over the years and for the education I've gotten from this organization led by a series of great presidents, including obviously Mark. And it's been a great learning experience. And I've been honored to be in a position, I think, to have made a difference. One of the really good things about having a Kentuckian in this particular role is it gives us a chance to punch above our weight. You know, we're kind of a medium to small state. I can tell you California gets whatever it wants. They've got 54 members of the U.S. House. These big delegations in the House, driven by the populations of their states, are in a very advantageous position when it comes to almost every issue. So when a state our size gets somebody in this role, take Alvin Barkley, for example. That was the original tobacco program when he had this job. If any of you are from far west Kentucky, it's no accident the uranium enrichment plant in Paducah ended up in Paducah. That decision was made when Barkley was in a prominent position. So my hope is that I can continue to give Kentucky an opportunity to punch above its weight, not only in agriculture, but in a whole lot of other issues as well. I would touch on one sort of sobering note, and that's the opioid crisis. It's affecting many in America, and a lot of us here in Kentucky. Is an ongoing struggle, something we are all trying to tackle and get ahead of. And it's going to be with us for a while, but that's a sobering note that's occurring across our country that we need to all work together to tackle. And in Congress, what we've been doing is passing multiple pieces of legislation that provide funding and then meeting with groups, in my case, and I'm sure this is going on in other states as well, down here, helping them apply for the money for these treatment and recovery efforts that are going on to help us get past this hideous scourge. But overall, I'm optimistic and upbeat for the country. I know these have not been great times in agriculture in recent years, but I guarantee you this, we are going to get a farm bill. If we get a farm bill, it'll have the legalization of industrial hemp in it. It will no longer be treated as a Justice Department issue, but a USDA issue. The way it'll work, if you're interested, you'll just deal with Commissioner Quarles. And you'll get permission almost automatically. If there are any local sheriffs who have any heartburn about this, they know everybody in the county because they got a list of everybody who's entitled to grow it and go by and pay a visit if they choose to. But that's the way it'll work, and I think it gives us a great opportunity for the future. So, Mark, let me just close by this. 100 years is quite something, and I think I've got a commemoration of that I want to give to you that I put in the congressional record and framed for you guys just to commemorate this 100 years, which is extraordinarily significant.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I enjoyed being here, and I don't know whether you have a break after this or not, but I'm going to be over here somewhere, and if you have an iPhone and are interested in doing a photo, I'm going to hang around for a while. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here this morning. I hope you had a great meeting here in Louisville. Thanks a lot.
Senator, before you leave, we have another award that we would like to make a presentation to. Every year at the end of a Congress, every 2 years, the American Farm Bureau makes a Friend of Farm Bureau award based on the voting record for that Congress. Somewhere, I don't know where, but somewhere, Leader McConnell has a bunch of these because he's received this award every year that it has been available. And they're all listed right here on this. Before the 115th Congress, sir, you have represented Kentucky so well, but you have represented the nation in agriculture so well. I want to present you with the Friend of Farm Bureau Award.
I just thought of one other thing that I do want to do here in conclusion. As all of you know, we lost President Bush 41 last night. There was never a nicer human being than him, unless it was Barbara. They were truly extraordinary. And when you think about the arc of his life, from a guy 18 years old flying those fighter pilots in the South Pacific, to all the different positions he held in the government, everything from the CIA director, ambassador to China, vice president, president. I first interacted with him in 1984 when I was running for the Senate, and two of my highlights of that year, to give you an idea of how little Reagan and Bush thought of my chances of winning. Here in Louisville one night after one of President Reagan's debates with Walter Mondale, there was a kind of a rally over at the Howard Regency. This was going to be my one moment in the sun. And Reagan had not done very well that night, and there were all these stories about how he was getting old and out of it. I had a spot on the stage. They told me to stand on my spot. I went over and I stood on my spot. Nancy Reagan was just to my right. I tried to make conversation with her. She was in a bad mood. He had not done well. She was not interested in talking to me. So I brushed it off, and I thought, okay, this is still going to be good. He's going to mention my name. So he gets up to this to the podium. He pulls out his cue cards, and he starts, and it says, "I'm so glad to be here tonight with my good friend Mitch O'Donnell." Yeah. So a couple of days later, Vice President Bush is up in northern Kentucky. And he said, we're really enthusiastic about our chances with our candidate, Mayor Mitch McConnell. So when you lose somebody of this stature, all of us, I think, begin to think, if we've had any interaction with them, events like that over the years. But he was really an extraordinary leader. And we'll have an opportunity to reflect on that over the next couple of days. He'll be lying in state in the Capitol beginning Monday night, I think it is, and all day Tuesday. And then there'll be a big service on Wednesday, all of which, if you're in a position to watch any of it, I think will be a moving experience for the country. It's always a big deal when we lose an American president, regardless of party. This guy was, at least for me, something very, very special, and I thought I'd share with you those stories before I departed, because we'll all be thinking about him over the next few days. Again, thanks again, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thanks so much.